In our headlines on this Thursday, July 31st, here in South Korea. South Korean exports headed for the American market will face 15% import duties from the Trump administration, according to the much-anticipated tariff deal between Seoul and Washington. And President Lee Jae-myung says this latest trade agreement serves to remove uncertainties in the export arena for local businesses as he prepares to meet with his U.S. counterpart in August. Meanwhile, the Lee administration is looking to raise corporate tax back to 25% as part of a fiscal reform plan aimed at addressing a substantial shortfall in tax revenue. Today, we start with team coverage of the trade accord signed by South Korea and the U.S. First then, our Park Jun-han covers the details of the deal that includes U.S. tariffs lowered to 15% for South Korean products. Do take a listen.
South Korea and the U.S. announced a major tariff agreement on Wednesday local time to lower reciprocal tariffs from 25% to 15%. The deal, however, required South Korea to commit to a $350 billion investment package. The $350 billion will be in the form of an investment vehicle and will be spent through equity investments, loans, and credit guarantees. An additional $100 billion will be spent on purchasing U.S. energy, mostly liquefied natural gas. The South Korean government said sector-specific tariffs involving semiconductors and pharmaceuticals are guaranteed most favored nation status, ensuring treatment as favorable as that afforded to other nations.
So we've made sure that if we face tariffs in the future on things like semiconductors or pharmaceuticals, we'll receive the same treatment as most favored nation level, ensuring we're not at a disadvantage compared to other countries' agreements.
Through the deal, tariffs on automobiles have also been reduced from the current 25% to 15%. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Economy and Finance Koo Yoon-chul commented after the agreement that South Korea's shipbuilding project, which involves large-scale investments by South Korean private shipbuilders in the U.S., played a key role in the tariff negotiations.
The most noble part of today's agreement is the $150 billion South Korea-U.S. shipbuilding cooperation package, a project called Make American Shipbuilding Great Again.
This agreement will fund new U.S. shipyard construction, workforce training, supply chain rebuilding, and ship maintenance, leveraging South Korea's shipbuilding expertise. The remaining $200 billion will be spent to support strategic sectors that are closely related to the country's economic security. Those sectors include semiconductors, batteries, nuclear energy, biotechnology, and critical minerals. South Korea also pledged to purchase $100 billion worth of U.S. energy, primarily liquefied natural gas, over 4 years, redirecting existing import needs without any added economic burden. The last-minute tariffs agreement has reduced uncertainty for South Korean companies, which account for 19% of the country's global exports, ensuring they compete on equal or better terms than their rivals. Further details about the deal will be finalized in ongoing talks. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
Now that a tariff deal has been sealed with the U.S., what are its broader implications? Our economic correspondent Kim Do-yeon tells us.
While a framework has been reached on tariffs, dealing with tariffs is far from over. Deputy Prime Minister for Finance Koo Yoon-chul told reporters that key details still need to be finalized, particularly regarding the $200 billion investment portion of the $350 billion package. As part of the deal, tariffs on most South Korean goods will increase from 0 to 15%.
A 15% tariff is undoubtedly challenging, especially for a country that has a free trade agreement with the U.S. But if our companies can leverage their creativity and competitiveness, this could turn into a new opportunity. While the broader agreement is done, we will continue to work out the specifics through further talks with the U.S.
Among the headline agreements is MASCA, a strategic shipbuilding initiative led by South Korea and backed by $150 billion in investment. This stands in contrast to the remaining $200 billion, which will be largely controlled by the U.S. The Korean government has emphasized this distinction, especially in light of comparisons with Japan's deal. Tokyo pledged a $550 billion investment, and when the deal was announced, President Trump claimed that 90% of the profit would go to the U.S. South Korean officials also underscore the size.
South Korea has a trade surplus of $66 billion with the U.S., while Japan's is around $68.5 billion. Yet our total investment fund is smaller. If we exclude the $150 billion led by our own companies, our actual contribution is $200 billion, just 36% the size of Japan's.
On the tariff side, the increase from 0 to 15% marks a significant shift. When it comes to cars, an industry with fierce competition, while Korean cars were tariff-free, their competitors, Japan and the EU, paid 2.5%. Now that advantage has disappeared, leveling the playing field in terms of price competitiveness. Agriculture and livestock market access, a contentious issue, was not included in the deal, despite strong pressure from the U.S. Officials revealed that during negotiations, they presented a photo from the 2008 mass protests in South Korea against U.S. beef imports, which drew over 10 million demonstrators, reminding U.S. officials it's a red line for them. On another side note, while President Trump did not meet with any other trade delegations, he made time to meet with South Korean officials. He later said this was a sign of his respect for South Korea. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Right, so what is the presidential office saying about the efforts of its top economic delegation to seal a deal with the U.S. ahead of Friday's deadline? To answer this question and more, I have Arirang's Yoon Jung-min standing by live at the Yongsan office. Jung-min, welcome. So let's begin with the president's response to the trade deal.
Sunny, President Lee said the deal has eliminated uncertainties in export conditions and that South Korea has crossed a major hurdle. Take a listen.
국익 중심의 유연한 실용 외교를 통해서 급변하는 대외 환경의 파고를 슬기롭게 넘어가야 될 것입니다.
Presiding over a weekly meeting with his aides on Thursday, the president instructed the officials to fully prepare for follow-up measures, as well as long-term tasks, such as expanding consumption at home and diversifying export markets. He added he expects South Korea and the U.S. to further strengthen their economic cooperation and alliance. Taking to social media earlier, Lee noted the investment fund worth $350 billion will solidify the foundation of bilateral cooperation in shipbuilding, semiconductors, and rechargeable batteries, among others. In particular, he added $150 billion will be solely committed to shipbuilding to help Korean shipbuilders make inroads into the U.S.
Right. Jung-min, meanwhile, what's the latest regarding the proposed summit between the president and his U.S. counterpart?
Right, so the two leaders' first face-to-face talks are expected within 2 weeks, according to the presidential chief of staff for policy, Kim Yong-bum.
I heard President Trump ask Secretary Rubio to set a date for next week, but considering schedules, it'll take place within 2 weeks.
With a major diplomatic challenge somewhat removed, summit diplomacy between South Korea and the U.S. is expected to pick up speed, which has been stalled since President Lee Jae-myung took office in June. Details of the summit, including the date, could be discussed when South Korea's Foreign Minister Cho Hyun meets his U.S. counterpart Marco Rubio in Washington on Thursday local time. The summit agenda is expected to include setting details of the framework deal. Security issues such as the allies' defense cost sharing and purchasing U.S.-made weapons were not addressed this time, but they could be brought up when the two leaders meet. Earlier this morning, South Korea's Defense Minister An Kyu-baek spoke over the phone with U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, where they agreed to modernize the alliance and expand cooperation in shipbuilding. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Jung-min, thank you for that coverage. That was our Yoon Jung-min with the response from the presidential office regarding Seoul's trade deal with Washington. And as our Chongmin just mentioned, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun is set to sit down with his American counterpart Marco Rubio in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, local time. The meeting will mark their first face-to-face as top diplomats and follows the recently concluded trade talks between their two administrations. On their agenda are prospects of a summit between their leaders at the White House within the next 2 weeks, as shared by the U.S. leader on his social media platform on Wednesday. Meanwhile, the National Assembly here stands poles apart in its response to news of a trade deal between Seoul and Washington. The ruling Democratic Party welcomed the deal, calling it a rewarding result of productive protection of national interests and a tangible feat of the president's pragmatic diplomacy. DP floor leader Kim Byung-gi said Thursday the deal would bolster the bilateral alliance as well as broader trade ties. Meanwhile, the main opposition People Power Party voiced concern that South Korea may have made excessive concessions while acknowledging that the 15% U.S. tariff rate was reasonable. PP floor leader Song Eun-seok underscored that the value of the pledged investment in and imports from the U.S. surpassed the country's foreign exchange reserves. Earlier on this Thursday, President Lee Jae-myung presided over his first workshop with government officials to share the new administration's approach to state governance. Addressing an audience of 280 people, he stressed that public service should be grounded in serving the people. He further emphasized that tangible change depends on those putting policies into practice on the ground. To take a listen.
저는 대체적으로 한 3가지 정도가 중요하다. 방향, 자세 이런 거죠. 마인드, 기본적인 마인드. 공직자란 뭐냐? 공직자는 국민을 위한 봉사자라고 헌법에 써놨죠. 그리고 저는 제가 비록 국민에게 선택받은, 국민에게 위임받은 대통령이라고 하지만 제가 할 수 있는 일은 거의 없어요. 다 여러분 또는 여러분들이 다시 또 위임한 공직자들, 공무원들을 통해서 할 수밖에 없습니다. 여러분들은 몸통이고 실체죠. 저는 머리 좋게 말하면 아니면 사고와 가치 같은 허상에 가까운 거죠. 실체는 여러분들이에요.
He also called for the elimination of policy audits, finding fault with the retrospective punishment of civil servants for policy decisions. The government is looking to reform its fiscal policy to address a substantial shortfall in tax revenue. Our finance correspondent Moon Ji-young has details.
The 2025 tax reform bill introduces a mix of targeted tax credits for strategic industries and welfare, alongside adjustments to corporate and capital gains taxes.
Over the past 3 years, our tax revenue base has weakened rapidly, leading to a significant drop in the tax burden ratio. Therefore, this year's tax reform bill prioritizes reinforcing the weakened tax revenue base for fiscal sustainability, while also supporting economic strength and stabilizing people's livelihoods.
The reform package aims to enhance tax credits for R&D and investment in future strategic industries, including AI. Furthermore, to enhance K-content competitiveness, tax credits for webtoons will be newly introduced, and tax support for video content creation will be expanded. Beyond these targeted incentives, the framework includes tax cuts designed to encourage corporate payouts and boost the stock market. Specifically, to encourage high dividends, a separate taxation system for dividend income from high dividend companies is being introduced. This approach excludes these dividends from the comprehensive financial income tax base, allowing earnings from stock dividends to be taxed independently rather than combined with other income. Despite the debate over tax cuts for the super-rich, a 35% tax rate is expected to be applied to the highest dividend income bracket. On the other hand, the bill aims to restore tax equity and rebuild the nation's revenue base based on the principle of ability to pay. The country's corporate tax rate will be raised by 1 percentage point across the board, with the top corporate rate increasing to 25%, effectively reversing a cut introduced by the previous administration. The bill also tightens capital gains tax rules by lowering the threshold for major shareholders. While currently only those holding 5 billion won, or roughly $3.6 million in a single listed stock are taxed, that threshold will be reduced to 1 billion won, or just under $720,000. Tax support will be expanded for low and middle-income households, with measures such as an increase in the income deduction limit for credit card use by up to 500,000 won, or roughly $360, depending on the number of children for families. The tax burden on self-employed individuals and small business owners is also expected to be alleviated. The bill will first go through cabinet meetings before being submitted to the National Assembly for final approval. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
In other news, the U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to hold steady its benchmark interest rate for the fifth session in a row. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
As widely anticipated, the U.S. Federal Reserve left its interest rates unchanged on Wednesday, holding its benchmark lending rate steady in the 4.25 to 4.5% range.
Today, the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged. We believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments.
According to Powell, the U.S. Fed remains firmly focused on the dual mandate of maximum employment and stable prices, stressing that the economy is in a solid position despite ongoing uncertainty. He added that the unemployment rate remains low and that the labor market is considered at or near full employment, while inflation is running slightly above the Fed's 2% long-term target. The latest decision also came despite recent public pressure from President Donald Trump urging a rate cut. And earlier on Wednesday, Trump blamed Powell for the high interest rates, stressing that they hurt the American people.
Each point that this gentleman keeps up costs us $365 billion a year. Think of that. 1 point, $365 billion. If you bring it down a point, we save 365. We should be the lowest interest rate, and we're not. We're 38. Number 38, because of the Fed. It's all because of the Fed. He's done a bad job. Now he's got to...
In a rare move, two Republican-appointed Fed governors, Christopher Waller and Michelle Bowman, dissented, signaling their preference for a rate cut of 25 basis points. That marks the first time since 1993 that two Fed governors have dissented on the same rate decision. Waller argued that while tariffs may temporarily push prices higher, the inflation impact will be short-lived, with levels returning to normal by next year. The next FOMC meeting is slated for September, with many anticipating a rate cut during the sixth scheduled meeting of the year. The rate freeze means the rate gap with the Bank of Korea stands at 1.75 to 2%. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, Samsung Electronics has recorded a second quarter operating profit of 4.7 trillion Korean won, or $3.4 billion. Now, this is a 55% plunge on year and over 21% lower than market projections. Officials are linking the weak numbers to the company's chip division, where operating profit plummeted about 94% in the second quarter on year. Yet despite the slowing profit, overall chip sales rose 11% on year, driven by demand for premium server chips and increased foundry orders. Meanwhile, findings by Statistics Korea show industrial output rebounding in June for the first time in 3 months. Analysts are linking the rebound to the semiconductor and automobile sectors. Consumer spending also gained ground for the first time in 4 months, with clothing and cosmetics driving up sales. In contrast, facility investment remained in negative territory, extending its fall for the 4th month in a row. On the international front, Canada is the latest country to share intentions to recognize Palestine as a state amid Israel's continued military offensive in Gaza. Our An Sung-jin explains.
Canada says it plans to join several countries in formally recognizing Palestine as a state. According to Prime Minister Mark Carney during the cabinet meeting on Wednesday, Canada intends to do so at a meeting of the UN General Assembly in September this year, as long as preconditions are met.
This intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much-needed reforms, including commitments by the Palestinian Authority's President Abbas to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold general elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarize the Palestinian state.
Canada also signed the New York Call, a joint statement of the ministers of foreign affairs from 15 countries, including Australia, France, and Spain, that calls for an immediate ceasefire, release of hostages, and a two-state solution where Israel and Palestine live within secure and recognized borders. Conditions in Gaza remain dire. Israeli soldiers reportedly killed at least 48 Palestinians. According to Associated Press on Wednesday, IDF soldiers opened fire on a crowd at a key gateway for aid trucks at a checkpoint in the north of the Strip. This incident comes as Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, is headed to Israel for talks on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. UN agencies have repeatedly stated that the population has already exceeded the threshold for famine in the Gaza Strip. Han Sung-jin, Arirang News.
The intentions of a North Korean man to defect to South Korea have been confirmed by officials here. According to the Unification Ministry on this Thursday, the confirmation follows a comprehensive investigation. The North Korean man reportedly crossed the border on July 3rd and was taken into custody by South Korean troops. He is now under South Korean government protection and set to enter the country's standard resettlement program. Disaster management authorities and pundits from the Asia-Pacific are currently gathered here in South Korea to address strategic cooperation against calamities. Our Shin Ha-young reports.
Natural disasters, including floods and earthquakes, continue to threaten millions around the world, and Asia-Pacific economies are no exception. Amid these challenges, South Korea's Ministry of the Interior and Safety is hosting this year's APEC meetings on disasters in the western port city of Incheon from Wednesday, with disaster management officials and experts from across the Asia-Pacific participating to strengthen cooperation on risk reduction. As part of the 3 days of meetings, the Emergency Preparedness Working Group convened on Wednesday to explore ways to strengthen practical cooperation with a focus on digital tools for disaster risk management. The Senior Disaster Management Officials Forum, scheduled for Thursday, is expected to build on those discussions and work toward actionable policy steps and stronger joint responses to emerging threats.
The key focus of this conference is to strengthen international cooperation in responding to complex disasters, such as climate change and pandemics. With its advanced ICT capabilities, South Korea has a well-developed early warning system and is well-positioned to contribute to global efforts, including the UN's Early Warning for All initiative.
Alongside the meetings, the Interior Ministry is partnering with New Zealand's National Emergency Management Agency to conduct joint disaster drills, collaborate on research, and share information regularly to help reduce disaster risks.
But from an emergency management perspective, the knowledge and the advancements that Korea has well in advance of New Zealand, we're really looking forward to understanding that, how we can share knowledge, how we can share our experiences to make both countries stronger, particularly, as I said earlier, in the light of the changing hazardscape that we all face.
A disaster safety exhibition featuring Korea's latest technologies will be open through Sunday, highlighting the country's innovations and efforts to expand its presence in the global disaster tech market. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
The intense heat continues to grip the entire nation. Tomorrow brings more of the same: scorching sun, sweltering air, and no sign of relief just yet. The extreme heat will persist, with daytime temperatures once again reaching above 35 degrees Celsius in many regions. And many of us in the capital area felt a lot of relief today thanks to that cloud coverage. But there will be nothing but sunshine tomorrow with very strong UV rays nationwide. Tropical nights are expected to continue. Here in the capital area, it seems like we are having the roughest summer this year with a low of 28 degrees here in Seoul tomorrow morning, Chuncheon, Daejeon at 25 degrees. Then by the afternoon, most regions will see highs soaring to 36 degrees Celsius. Then around the middle of next week, rainfall is expected in the central regions, which may help ease the extreme heat that's gripped the nation for weeks. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Do stay with us and thank you for now.